So I just wanted to share a little bit of, well, not so much history of the internet, because I think we all have a pretty good idea about that. What I more want to share is like how the internet, I suppose, keeps functioning. I think that'd be the best way of putting it. And not from the political term, because I put this slide in just for entertainment. That question comes up so often in so many different places, like who actually runs the internet? And of course, it depends entirely who you ask about who actually makes, well, the internet function as it is. So it's better just to step back a little bit in time, I thought. It was really, I suppose, the internet that we know today really took shape, I suppose, in the late 80s. At least from my perspective in my formative years at university, that was pretty much where TCP/IP-based networking kind of appeared for, well, I won't say for everybody to use, but at least for folks who are at university, you know, whether in my case as a PhD student, or even a lot of the undergraduates at that time starting to make use of the early bits of the internet. So in North America, so in the United States, the National Science Foundation network was really the first attempt at some kind of organized interconnection of networks. National Science Foundation funded the early academic and research network infrastructure, and really the first organized type of gathering of the people who made this infrastructure work was the NSFNet Regional Techs meeting. So folks who are running the academic networks in the different parts of the states were really discussing how to keep the infrastructure working, how to deal with interconnect issues, how to deal with connectivity issues, and just general operational issues of common concern. Now, of course, internet goes way back even before then. Internet Society has what they call the Internet History Mailing List, where a lot of the folks who were around in the 70s and the 80s were discussing the early bits and pieces. And what I want to look at more is really what's starting to be recognizable as the network today. And I think the main thing to note is in February 1994 is when this joint techs meeting, the regional techs meeting, revised its charter and became what's known as the North American Network Operators Group. NANOG, I suppose, is the main network operators group that we all know globally. Even though it's very much North American, it attracts a lot of people from all around the world. And the purpose is still exchange of technical information, discussion of implementation issues among the network service providers. I'm steering away from using internet service providers because it's not just commercial internet, but anybody who is running TCP/IP-based network. I mean, I've just poached all this from the NANOG archives, so the history of where they came from. So that's very much a North America view. Of course, I'm European. Well, the country I grew up in is no longer European, but I won't go on about that. But in Europe, same thing was happening. Late 80s, early 90s, Réseau IP Européens, RIPE, began with very much the same concept as, I suppose, the regional techs was in the US. Again, folks operating early IP-based network infrastructure were really meeting, it was a small group, probably no much bigger than sitting here at the moment, to again share experiences with fledgling network and do a lot of the early technical coordination work. And one thing they also started doing was building a database of operational data. 1990, the RIPE community, as it started to be called, because Réseau IP Européens is a bit of a mouthful, RIPE community decided to actually fund a coordination center. So the different entities chipped in some funding really to employ full-time staff, and then part of that became the RIPE NCC. And of course, those of us who are based in Europe know the RIPE NCC is the IP address registry. They started doing the registry function in 1992. So, and that's the history from the European side. So globally, these were really the first two major efforts of people running IP-based networks, coordinating with each other to make the infrastructure work and make the infrastructure work better. What they were really talking about, discuss issues of common concern, so talking about some of those, sharing experiences, carrying out a lot of the technical coordination work, and talking about implementation issues. If I remember back to the routers of the late 80s, early 1990s, it was very, very early software. Protocols like BGP, which is needed to run the global internet today, were in their very early development stages. So there was a lot of trying to work out how to make all these networks work together. And so these were really the first two of the network operator gatherings that we now take for granted today. So NANOG for North America and RIPE in Europe. And so those activities, maybe because I come from a network operations background, those two activities I really see as the efforts by the community to make the internet work as it is. We've got all the political side of making the internet work, we've got all the domain names, political side of making the internet work, but fundamentally the connectivity between different organizations, between different countries, across continents and so forth, is very much not run by these groups, but very much facilitated by the different operators being together. So what happened after that? Well, Apricot started a few years later. So this was in 1995, basically, the ideas for Apricot were formed. So some of the folks working in the internet, or the early internet in Asia, attended NANOG and were very inspired by what they saw there, where operators of different networks who all compete with each other, but also were in the same room to discuss issues, collaborate, and so on. So that was the inspiration for formation of Apricot in the Asia-Pacific region. In Africa, we had AFNOG forming in 2000. For the Middle East, MENOG in 2007. But it really wasn't until 2010 for Latin America that we saw the LACNOG effort happening. Before then, for Latin America, we had the research networks meeting, but there was nothing formal for the, I suppose, the rest of the operational internet. And the other thing we saw is that in the early 2000s, late 90s was the rapid growth of the internet in Europe. By the early 2000s, after the Asia financial crisis, 97, 98, the internet in Asia grew absolutely crazy. I was based in Australia by 1998, and I spent a lot of my time traveling around the region, helping a lot of these countries build internet infrastructure. But again, it was all really very discoordinated. I think it's not really a very good word, but it was really just each country to their own thing, even with Apricot happening there. And so, the needs of, for example, South Asia, so India and the countries around it, were very different from the needs of Indochina or the Pacific or the northeastern part, or even in Central Asia. And so we found a lot of country operator groups starting to form, and some of the sub-regionals starting to form. And also because people couldn't travel to NANOG, so North America, visa issues, especially after 2001, or coming into Europe to go to RIPE meetings was not very simple either. And so this really started, I suppose, the distribution of the operator community around the world. So I'm quickly looking at each one. I'm not going to go into a great long history, but Apricot was the summit, or is still the summit for the Asia-Pacific region, held once a year, usually at the start of the year. It's the first of the big regional events that happens. And one theme that you'll find on all these operator group meetings is the training aspect. Now, NANOG and RIPE started off as a coordination thing, but what we found is, especially at NANOG, and that's where it started, is newcomers to internet, running internet infrastructure, would come to NANOG hoping to learn from the experts. And it was kind of a meeting, and the newcomers were like, well, you're a newcomer, go away, learn things until you can take part in our meeting and understand. And so what happened in NANOG was the day before became an informal kind of tutorial session about how they build the conference network. Other topics started being added into it until there was a formal training program, which there is today. Apricot started with that very same thing, early 2000s, training program. And today, you look at all the operator groups, training is such a key element of what they all do. Because even today, there are still so many new operators jumping onto this internet thing to try and make, I suppose, make a living, but connect their organizations. The big discussion at the moment is that, enterprises, so businesses, government entities are no longer just buying internet access. They're actually working out how to take part in the whole ecosystem themselves. So, Apricot, and these don't come out very well, but you get some of the sense of, the training, the locations, the presentations. Indonesia was so delighted to have us, they lined the streets of Bali with banners about the event, and it was such a significant thing for the country. So these are just a sample of what was going on. AFNOG, a lot of the NSRC team knows very well. And again, the first one was in 2000. It grew out of Internet Society's network training workshops, which had run through the 90s. Anybody who's been to an AFNOG, yes, there is coordination and discussion, technical discussion, but the vast majority of it is about training. The knowledge that those of us have gained, we're passing on to the new generation or the newcomers to the network. And they see the same thing. Again, it's not very great pictures, but you see, for example, here is this Mark here was my student in the first AFNOG I went to, and here he is a few years later presenting the same content. And so this is a very typical process. And he's now, chief engineer at one of the biggest transit carriers in Africa. So it's a role way, way bigger than I could have ever even imagined. Thinking back to when he came to the first workshop, what was it, 2001 or 2002? But these are sort of examples. A lot of these people in the earlier photos are now very influential in what they're doing, running the internet infrastructure, either in their country or elsewhere. South Asia. So again, look at the dates. This is early 2000s. So this is India, the countries round about. First meeting Kathmandu in Nepal, which it's kind of a little bit strange that it would start in a small country rather than India, which you think is the big one that would pretty much run what's round about. But partly a view there that we don't need this, we're bigger and better than this. But SANOG started in Nepal, and then it covers all countries in the South Asia region. And this one meets twice a year to try and get around all the countries, because once it got going, the demand and the knowledge shared, again, the technical work is so big. The training was such a key role for this. And one thing that SANOG achieved very quickly was getting operators to actually talk to each other. And that's made such a big difference for the internet in that part of the world. And again, some of the pictures, you get the same sense. This is all from my archive. You get, again, some of the same sense of the training that's going on, some of the social events and whatever I picked up, the presentation. You can see, very hard to see, but some of the old equipment that we had to ship in and out of the different countries and so forth to facilitate a lot of this. Looking at the Pacific, so this Pacific Islands, 2004. Started off in Fiji. Again, 2 meetings per year, moving around the Pacific. Now the Pacific Islands are probably the biggest of all the regions that we have to try and cover. It's just most of it is underwater. But so getting around the Pacific is really not very simple. And so the three sub-regions, Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, we try and get around, again, for the same thing. The main focus there has been training. Again, the knowledge share, so folks who have been in different parts of the world sharing best practices, internet operations, especially the Pacific technology. They have been satellite connected for such a long time. It's only really submarine fiber in the last 3-4 years is starting to connect a lot of those nations to what we have taken for granted for much longer. And again, some pictures from there. The various group photos and again the training and so forth. Some very happy participants there way back in PACNOG 8, whenever that was, 2007 I think it would be. So again, some examples of the gatherings. Middle East, first meeting, a little bit more recent. It was harder work to get this going, but it was all the same reasons. Again, to encourage the countries there to do cross-border cooperation with each other, to actually build a proper internet infrastructure in that part of the world, rather than, oh yes, we connect to our, the next country in London, which was a very common thing that we had in the early mid-2000s. And again, I've dug up a few photos from various MINOG over the last few years, getting the same idea. So what's happened with all this, because of the regional ones and the sub-regional ones, a lot of countries now have their own operator group. In fact, I think almost every European country now has this group. None of them are formally organized. They're all informal. It's not like somebody's come along and said, from high and said, there will be a network operator group. They don't work like that at all. When there's a motivation for operators to meet, then they will work out a way of trying to do that. So I think it's almost every European country. I was trying to work through the countries to see which one didn't have, and I don't know. I really don't know. If I look through Southeast and East Asia, almost every single country has. Probably less so in Africa, but a lot of African countries are now starting to have their own operator group. Similar with Latin America, they're starting to have their own operator group in country as well. International travel is not always in everybody's reach. It might be somebody's dream to go to, even go to an NNOG. Okay, getting visas and the travel expense, even pre-pandemic, or even coming to Apricot or going to RIPE meetings, even getting AFNOG. A lot of us have been involved trying to get people across the continent, and it's not simple, not as simple as it might seem, but there's this big need for this. And what the country NOGs do is help develop a local operator community to manage local operational issues. Something that's going on in Rwanda is probably totally different from what's going on in Kenya or Uganda or South Africa. So it's very important for the operators, even in one country, to be able to talk to each other, even if they don't want to have anything to do with each other. And so, I've dragged a few photos up here as well. I don't remember where they're all from. It's like there's, the two over at the side there, there's from Mongolia. Probably the last place you would think there would be a network operator group, but that one got going a few years ago. By the time we got to, when would that be, 2018 I think it was, 2017, 2018, there were about 120 people in the room there as the first effort. The younger generation, a little bit more trusting than the older generation, and a very keen need to basically work together, collaborate, not to mention the training I've discussed before. It's Bangladesh, and then there's Bhutan has the NOG as well. They're very successful events. That one is in the middle is Rwanda NOG, which got going a few years ago as well. So, what causes all this? Why do these operator groups happen? I've tried to list them there. There's probably more reasons, but Business relationships. I mean, you could probably pick up a phone and talk to somebody else, but we've spent the last 2 years on Zoom, and how much we've loved that. Not. People are so happy to be able to meet in person again. It is so important to be able to meet face to face. People ignore email, they ignore phone calls, number unknown, forget it. So, but face to face, in person, you know who the person is, you know what they represent, it's much easier to interact. Industrial relationship, technology discussions, a lot of the conferences very actively talking about technology. Not developing new internet standards, that's done by the Internet Engineering Task Force, it's a separate entity. But people who are just running networks, and it's like, oh, this equipment from such and such can't make it work. Do you know how to make it work? That type of thing. Operational best practices. The usual thing, you can read the manual, tells you what to do in the manual. It doesn't tell you how to run the thing as best as possible. How to run the thing comes with experience. And so newcomers are very happy, very willing to listen to people who are coming, who've got experience in using any types of equipment that are used to make the internet function. Comparing experiences. Oh, what do you think of that vendor? You don't buy them, it doesn't work, and this is not complete, and the tech support only speaks whatever language, and they don't speak your language, and not interested. So there's things like that. So a lot of it is done in these face-to-face meetings. Purchasing decisions, heavily influenced because people can meet. It's not left to a procurement department. That's the last thing you want to do. It's all done, influenced by the people who run the network itself. Networking software features worked out. Probably less so nowadays because the vendors are still, they're kind of a bit more, they're harder to push along, but certainly in the 90s and the 2000s, Nanog and Riot meetings, you'd be sitting in maybe a bar or a restaurant somewhere, there'll be the napkins. For example, the Border Gateway Protocol used by BGP was designed on a napkin. And the napkin is in the Cisco Museum in San Jose. You can go and see it. But it's that sort of thing. And there was lots and lots of that happening. A lot of the great things that were discovered or worked out in the 90s and 2000s came out of conversations at network operator group meetings. Training and learning from colleagues. That's so valuable, being able to meet somebody. You can sit and watch a YouTube video or a recording of any of the NSRC folks giving a presentation, which is great in itself. But if you come to an event and you meet the trainer, you can go and talk to them during the tea break or over lunch or something, which is totally different from, okay, I've watched the video, then what? Email to the trainer and you may or may not get an answer, or you may not get one as quickly as you would hope for. I put that one at employment opportunities. I presented this slide quite a few times, and you could see some of the the management folks who would come to some of the NOGs go, Philip, you shouldn't be putting things like that in there. But it's absolutely true. A lot of people it's really just to see what the market is like, looking for other opportunities, because even though I don't like it, people moving around from organization to organization helps improve the internet operational infrastructure overall. And so the last point is really important, is keeping the internet working. Now, back to my early slide of who runs the internet, from my point of view, with an operational hat on, it's these entities that keep the internet working today. Never mind all the political bit or the design bit, it's the operators of today who keep it working. So who can go? It's anybody running any TCP/IP-based network. It's not just commercial operators. Anybody can go. So research and education networks. And for a lot of years there's been, R&E networks are over there, and the network operators for commercial internet are over here. NSRC's been spending quite a lot of time trying to bring the communities together. It's not like two separate networks. We're all part of the one big network, all using the same infrastructure. But content providers, distribution networks, so the Facebooks and the Googles and the Akamais that you all know, I'm sure, Amazon, AWS, the over-the-top providers, the broadcasters and so forth, data center operators, internet exchange point operators. So those of you who don't know, the internet exchange point is where operators interconnect the networks for free exchange of traffic, which helps keep the internet running cost effectively, low latency, high bandwidths available. Enterprises, university and research establishment network operators, anybody running the TCP/IP networks that we use today. So how are they created? As I said, it's not top-down. They're totally informal. So things like beer and curry night, or if you're in the Himalayas, momo and whiskey nights. But it's that sort of thing. People, a couple of friends from this provider and that provider, hey, let's go and have beer or whatever, it doesn't matter. And out of those regular meetings, they say, let's put together a day of something. Somebody comes and gives a few talks and so forth, and that gradually helps build the entity together. I mentioned Internet Exchange Point. So for example, the UK operator group grew out of the UK Exchange, because the UK Exchange had its member meeting, but it's like, yeah, we want to have a meeting that's outside this. So the UK Network Operators Forum grew out of the Exchange Point. So you see that happen in quite a few places as well. Groups of industry friends trying to help the local operations community. I kept that deliberately vague because, so many places, it's just a group of friends, maybe working in different organizations, say, hey, let's try and do this. Let's try and help this. Some grow out of regular organized training events. There's some of the events that NSRC has done that have led to the network operator groups being formed. The PACNOG was one of those. NSRC helped with one of the workshops before the Pacific Network Operators Group, and next year the NOG was formed because they wanted more of this. And some grow out of the Regional Internet Registry regional meetings. You have the operator group, especially here in Europe, where the Southeast Europe operator group has emerged, the Central Asian one, so Eastern Europe as well. I think I've got that right. I think we're Eastern Europe. Those are the ones that have grown out of just ripe regional meetings, and so on. Some of them eventually get a formal structure. I mean, if you look at NANOG, it's got quite a formal structure. It's got a board, and it's got a bank account, and it's incorporated. Apricot does the same thing. But the vast majority are just, hey, we're a group of friends just trying to do something, which is problematic today because sponsors won't give money unless that's giving it to a legal entity. You can't just, hey, I'll pop $10,000 into a friend's bank account, which today, this looks like money laundering. So the bigger operator groups that are legally established spend a lot of time helping the smaller ones that are not incorporated. But the legal entities tend to be more important these days. So the bigger ones help the smaller ones. So it's all a very collaborative and cooperative thing, but informal. There's no sort of global organizing law operator groups together. But we do try and coordinate a little bit. Otherwise, it would be a little bit chaos. I thought I'd throw this one in. It's not network operator group, but the peering fora have grown out of the NOGs. And this is for basically in each organization, there's somebody whose job is to determine who the network is going to connect to. So they're a peering coordinator. They would go to the NOGs, but they also now take part in what's called the peering forum, just for the peering coordinators. And so they would go and discuss interconnecting their network with somebody else, or interconnecting their network with Google or Facebook or Microsoft and so on. So be aware of those. Every region has a peering forum. Most countries now have a peering forum as well. And a very important part of ensuring that the internet stays connected as well. In fact, the NOGs start doing their own peering content also, because it's important for that community. Final slide is planning. there isn't any global coordination, but what we try and do, Internet Society early on had a planning calendar which NSRC hosted, and we now host this. It's basically education, outreach, and training calendar for internet development, primarily to host information about training courses, seminars like this, but also conferences. And so the network operator community uses calendars, this one especially, to make sure that their meeting doesn't overlap. So Apricot, for example, which I run, we make sure we don't overlap with NANOC. They make sure they don't overlap with us, because we have a lot of the same speakers, a lot of the same participation. And so this is actually quite important. And in fact, because there is a little bit of coordination, for example, in Southeast Asia, the NOGs basically are back-to-back. So you have SG-NOG in Singapore one day, my NOG in Malaysia the next day, you've probably had ID-NOG after the weekend, so people can do the trek around all of them. And PH-NOG is the other one, the Philippine one. They all sort of coordinate so that if you're going to Asia for a week, you can go around and do the 4 NOGs. And it benefits all of them. And it helps with this information dissemination, coordination, and so forth. So we try and keep us track as best we can. We encourage all the NOG organizers to put their events here. It helps with publicity, getting more international participation, and also make sure we don't trample on each other. So again, who runs the internet? So that's really what I wanted to share. It's an unseen part of the internet. Trying to explain, for example, to my mother or her friends what I do, and the network operator group, and it's never in the news. Well, no, we're not in the news. There are not many people relative to the population of the world using the internet, but we do a lot of the work to make sure that this thing still keeps working. That's pretty much what I wanted to share.